Welcome to the Sober Unicorn. We are a gay-hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I'm your host, Holden, and thank you for joining us today. Hey, everybody, it's Holden back here again with the Sober Unicorn. I hope everybody's having a fantastic day. If you're not, I hope your day does definitely get better. Today, we are being joined also by another person that reached out to us via Instagram to come on the show and kind of share her story and history and like journey of sobriety. So, everybody, say hello to Megan. How are you, Megan?
I'm well, Holden. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thank you for taking so much like your time out. I know I didn't give you much time to get this scheduled.
I like how you operate.
I was like, oh, I'm off tomorrow. I need to schedule some episodes. So thank you so
Worked
much
out
for doing that.
perfectly.
Yes, it sure did. So why don't you kind of give everybody like who you are, what your drug of choice was, and like how long you've been sober?
Sure. Well, my name is Megan Swan. I'm a wellness coach and consultant. I generally work with high performance women, entrepreneurs, and forward thinking companies to help them thread strategic wellness practices into their existing routines or company culture. And my journey to wellness is really a series of layers. So alcohol actually was my drug of choice. Amongst others, alcohol tended to lead to everything. But that was the thing that for me, I became very clear that that was the thing that was holding me back. And I didn't get that clarity until I started getting well in other senses first. So for me, it was really cutting back on processed food and sugar and bringing mindfulness. I started meditating and really being a lot more intentional about my mornings. Essentially, I started working with a health coach as a mom of two young boys at the time. And little by little, I sort of removed the possible things that could be uh, getting in my way. And what was really coming up for me as a young not young, as a sleep deprived mother was the way that I was reacting and interacting with my kids when I was tired or, not at my best was just too much anger, too much yelling. And, it's something that I still work on today, but, yeah, so I'm happy to tell you the story, but there was essentially sort of like the last straw for me was March 17th, 2018, St. Patty's Day. Although I wasn't really celebrating that. I was in like someone's ranch here in the middle of Chiapas, Mexico. They don't celebrate that. But, just kind of a normal Sunday where my girlfriend and I drank, I don't even know, like several bottles of wine over the course of the afternoon. Kids are swimming in the pool. And I drove home and I vaguely remember driving home. And I certainly remember like almost falling asleep at the wheel. And that was just like so many things as a child growing up with an alcoholic father that I just swore I would absolutely never do. And so previous to that, along working with the health coach, I tried quote unquote mindful drinking for a year. So I was just essentially like many addicts, if you feel like you need to control it to that extent, it's probably a sign that you need to quit. But yeah, so I was, counting drinks and only drinking, X amount of days a week. And it certainly helped. And I think it helped give me clarity. But I just knew that like, I just was so done. And I've been waking up with that shame and blame, shitty feeling for decades, right? Like it really started getting ugly in my 20s. But I guess the other important piece for me in the story is, I look at the pregnancy for most women is a time where you lay off the sauce, right? So that was when I really started taking better care of myself. I was actually quite obsessive about my first pregnancy. And so pregnancy, breastfed for 13 months, pregnant another year. So almost 4 years, I was gifted sobriety, if you will. Like I would have like a sip of red here and there, but it really didn't hit me the same. And I just was like, no, I'm good. And so I had that piece again of clarity to sort of fall back on, knowing that, it is possible to live a life without it. It's this the socially acceptable, I'm pregnant or I'm breastfeeding doesn't can just, parlay into something else. And so yeah, for me, I've since learned it's called spontaneous sobriety. So, it was a long journey. But I will say, like, when I decided to quit, like, I know that I decided to quit for X amount of time at the time. I think it was a year or whatever. And I've never gone back. And it's not this. I mean, sure, there's moments, I just went like on wine tour with my husband in Napa a couple months ago. Our honeymoon was in wine country in New Zealand. And there's moments where it's like, but all I do is just smell it. And it takes me back to that shame, shitty feeling. Or just like, even takes me back to like random dance floor moments where you just like, I was just completely not in a good place. And I'm like, no, I'm good. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a roundabout version of my story without taking up too much time.
No, of course. So, talking about, of course, you had, like you said, the 4 years roughly because of pregnancy, breastfeeding, and everything that you stopped. And you said you started taking good care of yourself at that time. So, why, after the second child finished breastfeeding, did you go back?
Yeah, good question. So basically, it's because I was able to, you know, I was had an external reason. I wasn't drinking. It was for my children, or to be so to fit in the society box at that moment. But no, it was like a deep interest to be in like the best form to grow babies, right, and feed them. Um, but at that point, the story I was telling myself was still like, so can't wait to get back to going out clubbing, drinking lots of wine with my husband over dinner. Like I was still very much looking forward to, my old life. I can also argue that it took me like 4, maybe 5 years to accept, as I think many women can relate, uh, that my life would never be what it was pre-children. And so, yeah, I mean, it started with, trying to go out and clubbing like we used to. And, I just couldn't stay awake until I wanted to go to bed at 1 when, the clubs just starting to get good. And, yeah, I feel like on some level, like I had to uh, regain my tolerance, like it very much started after, where I didn't really enjoy the taste of it or anything. Like it felt like poison. And uh but I just kind of like kept drinking a little more, and there would be like a different situation, or I just worked back up to, and I would say I never worked back up to the degree it was pre-pregnancy, but it was still dysfunctional.
I think, I mean, kind of what I gauge from that is the fact that you went back to drinking because sobriety was forced upon you because of pregnancy. And the thing is, I feel that's why when I see many people that are forced to go into a program due to legal issues, that's many times why they go out because it was a choice that they did not make. And now in 2018, after St. Patty's Day, you made the choice for yourself to stay sober. And here we are now today, a couple years later, still sober. Um, so I mean, there's a huge difference between like being sober for yourself and being forced into sobriety. Of course, yes, your kids nowadays have a huge factor to play in the reasons you chose to get sober. Um, so you said of course, you had your children, you started drinking. How bad did mommy wine culture take over since you um, of course, couldn't stay up late at the clubs anymore, so you had to now do your drinking at home with children.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to say that I wasn't that, steeped in it, but I think the problem with it is that it's, it started when I was a child and watched like what was acceptable and normal. And then I also loved all of those shows. Of course, right now they're escaping me, but where like the high power attorneys that are, really powerful women, but they still are somehow drinking a whole bottle of red to themselves after a long day at the firm and never waking up with a hangover. um, so I think it essentially just gave me permission to do. I mean, in the early years of motherhood, like, yeah, post breastfeeding anyone, the thing is, I just never got my sleep back on track. And I think that is like so key. That is the first pillar of wellness I focus on with anyone. And like, if you're not sleeping well, there's just like so many systems that are not supporting you, not in optimal running. And really, I think what we don't appreciate often is to the degree, I mean, sure, you physically feel tired, but it's like an emotional, mental exhaustion. And yeah, so I was just living in this haze, like I'd wake up and like coffee, I was living off of coffee, dark chocolate, and like relatively eating well. But then, sort of end of the day would be the wine. And I think what's so damaging is this narrative that it's like I earned it. It's like, okay, like in no shape or form is alcohol really doing you any favors. Like I'm happy to go down that whole rabbit hole, but I mean, I certainly, I think one thing that, I don't know when this episode will be out, but we're in October, which is breast cancer awareness. And yeah, I feel like it's a conversation that is not being had enough. I don't know how many like breast cancer awareness balls I went to, and it's just like a whole shit show of everyone's getting plastered to raise money for breast cancer. I'm like, the irony here. Like the number one factor for most women, I think it's 40%, increases your risk by 40%. And I can definitely say that like I have dear friends who were yogis, were super healthy, maybe not vegan, but vegetarian, like lived a very healthy lifestyle, except the wine. And it's just this elephant in the room, I think, sometimes. So for me, it was, yeah, I think it really came down to certain events. Like I definitely had the odd glass of wine, but I don't think I was ever, you categorize yourself to make yourself feel better. But I was never the mom that was having like 3 to 4 glasses like every night. Like I wasn't drinking alone, all those things. But it was very hard for me to go to a social situation or out for a really nice dinner and somebody else is participating in it, and to just be the one that doesn't. I mean, that's what I do all the time now. But at the time, it was very hard to get out of that mindset.
Of course, yeah, it's crazy. I have friends from my drinking days that they were on diets, they were trying to eat healthy, they were working out, and then because they felt that it was a reward at the end of the night, they're drinking 10 vodkas. And it's like, how is this a reward? I mean, this is very, you're trying to better yourself and better your physical health, but yet you're downing something that is literally damaging you. So you talked about toxins, of course. You started eating healthier, working out. So toxins that are like kind of in our control, which is our diet, things we put into our body. Besides alcohol, how important is it to dispose of these through in your everyday life?
I would say very important. Like I recommend you kind of start with the toxin that you think is going to be the easiest to get rid of, gain clarity on that, and then like hopefully move on to another one and not do it all at once. Having said that, I often recommend people do a detox, which is usually like hardcore, stop everything that's toxic for 3, 7, 21 days, whatever it is. But at the same time, I think you can gain the same clarity by being a little bit more gentle and just peeling back the layers. So let's say you start with gluten. This is one that's, ironically, it was my husband who's a surgeon, and he read Grain Brain first, and his one of his specialties is limb salvage and diabetic foot, and so he was just fascinated by the new science on how essentially it's type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and all of this, or a lot of it, is due to gluten. And so knowing that, like, I don't want to have Alzheimer's when I want to be as healthy as long as I can, for my kids, for my grandkids, and I don't want to be a burden, right? And so it kind of seemed hard, like, oh my God, I'm going to give up all bread, and like it's everywhere. Like we start getting but my approach to wellness is always trying to make it a part of who you are and not a check mark on your to-do list. So, you start somewhere, and once you take it off or out of your system for a while, then you're going to, again, similar to my situation with alcohol, you're going to be a lot more sensitive when you bring it back in. And that's where the clarity comes in, where you're like, consume X, feel like crap, or wake up the next morning with a puffy face and I didn't sleep as soundly. Like there's all sorts of things that are going on with gluten. And also, I should caveat here, like not everything affects every single individual the same. I mean, alcohol is one conversation, but when we're talking about the everyday toxins in our diet, that's a different conversation. Like some people are much more susceptible to it being problematic than others. And also, like, you kind of have to pick your poison because we have to live. Like, the processed food industry is just so prevalent. It's really hard to eat, 100% whole food, plant-based all the time. You have to live and ebb and flow, and essentially bring in tools that help you detoxify. The body is extremely intelligent. Like if you set it up and allow it to sleep and hydrate and give it an opportunity, like by having a healthier meal more frequently than unhealthier meals, it's self-regulating. It's when we just are constantly bombarding it. I like the analogy of, if you think of the house, your body's like a house, and your digestion is the kitchen. So if all you're doing all day is going and walking to where the outside garbage is to the inside, like taking out the trash all day long, then your body's like not doing anything else. It's not like, repairing the windows or repainting or sort of the things that like don't necessarily need to be done on a day-to-day survival. But long term, if you don't give your body the chance to do that deeper healing or restoration, it's going to add up pretty quickly. And then, often, and this varies between people too, like whether you feel physically bad first or it affects you mentally. And for me, sugar, and to this day, I'd say it's probably my main vice. But I have so much more awareness around it and pick it from different sources for different reasons. But sugar for me has like a direct correlation to bursts of anger or like being moody, or it just immediately throws me off. And it's like, okay, so once in a while, maybe that's worth it. And I know how to, counteract when I indulge, if you will, although I don't really like that word. It's just, having more awareness around all these things, which builds up over time when you do sort of a trial and error for yourself, by taking off some of these layers and figuring out, we can talk all about the physical. I think another huge one is social media, the news cycle. Like these are other layers that you can strip back and really gain a lot of clarity on how it's changing your emotional state, your spiritual state, and certainly just making, is it value add? Probably not to the same degree.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the overprocessed foods, I know every time I travel overseas, and of course, most of the time when it comes to other countries, they're a little bit less processed than the United States. And normally every time I come back home to Texas, I get deathly ill for like 24 hours. And it's the moment I eat something here because here I'm traveling. The worst case of it was when I went to Rome and you eat all this fresh food and all these fresh veggies and you come back and I ate some overprocessed pre-cooked ribs from the local grocery store. And it's insane on how quickly your body reacts to these things. Um, so beyond alcohol, of course, I mean, there's toxins such as like smoking, which here I'm vaping, but it's I was able to cut real cigarettes out of my life a couple months ago, and now I'm progressively working on quitting the vaping. But we can't quit everything at one time.
No, I don't think you can. Not in a sustainable way.
Yeah, so of course, beyond toxins that we have pure control over, which is like our diets and stuff, um, what about the toxins of other people, places, and things that are in our kind of outside of our inner circle? Um, how important is it to try to avoid those toxic people and those toxic places?
Yeah, well, I mean, very important, but also, I think this can kind of swing too far the other way sometimes. Again, pointing to social media. But I mean, it's essentially we have healthy boundaries. And I think, the hyper connected nature of our lives these days, it's kind of confusing and hard sometimes for people like where to put their boundaries up. But I think one great tool is journaling in terms of trying to figure out like where are you, who are these individuals. Like I can speak personally. There's certain friends over the years that like it took me more than like decades to figure out that no, wait, they always make me feel X, like they always make me feel less than I feel. And now I see that they're always just pointing out what I haven't done yet, or and does that mean you have to completely cut that person out of your life? Maybe. Or just let nature happen, which is like not connect, not contact them for a while. And but I'm very hesitant these days to like quickly, the whole cancel culture thing, like but there's nothing wrong with creating some organic space between you and the thing or the person, and reflecting on it. So whether that means journaling or just, I find journaling is really great because we have these convenient memories of, we think we know how we feel about everything, or we think we remember everything we did or consumed, and often it's a very convenient version of whatever we did. And when we're trying to get clarity on how we feel about something, um sometimes it's hard to see the loop, the pattern, the looping thought patterns that are going on, if you're not either bouncing them off of somebody or writing them down. And then you'll get to see with a more clarity your own patterns and be like, I am constantly feeling XYZ when I spend time with this group of people or this individual, or when I go into work, or, like maybe it's your work culture. I work with a lot of clients that, essentially got themselves to a point they need to take anti-anxiety, antidepressants, like all the things. And at no point did they question, like, why was I fundamentally all of a sudden depressed? And it was, a toxic work environment. So, sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, you're fine. The 100% with work environment. I mean, my previous industry was funeral business, and that is a hugely emotional toll on you and on the people around you that you work with. And it's a really high stress, and especially if you're downstairs, like in the prep room, the visuals that you see on a day-to-day basis with the deceased, like it could take, I mean, no matter how prepared you are or how long you've been in that industry, it can take a major emotional toll on you. And I know um, I was in my early sobriety when I moved into that industry, and I mean, it was hard to go to work and deal with all these emotions, this super high stress environment where everything is like has to be so precise. and so articulated, so this family's not mad that they didn't get their register book or something in time, and not want to go home that night and just like drown out the entire damn bottle of vodka.
Mm. Yeah. Wow, that's a very unique example. But did you watch Blackbird?
I have not. No,
I don't know if it would be helpful or make it worse, but it's
everybody wants me to watch that movie, and there's one called The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is apparently
I
like a
haven't.
horror movie. The one thing I tell people that are like is the closest depiction of the industry is a show called 6 Feet Under.
Oh yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, that is actually like a pretty authentic like view of that industry, and like even the bodies in that show are fairly like on point with what they actually look like. Because horror movies just ruin it for everybody, and you expect some catastrophe. Um, but people in your life, I mean, me, I know getting into sobriety, I had to be mindful on who I hung out with. I had to pull back from the people that I drank with and kind of reevaluate those friendships. And even now, I suffered two relapses recently, and it put so much more into perspective because these people that I thought were respectful of my industry or respectful of my sobriety, my journey, were not. And you have to make sure that I mean, yes, it was still my choice to pick up and still my choice to use, but ultimately, I need to make sure that the people I keep in my inner circle are not toxic individuals bringing the negative energy on a daily basis, and want to support you in your journey and help you through it and whatever you're going through. So, I mean, toxicity can be so much more than just the alcohol. It's the people around you, the stuff you bring in on social media. I mean, social media is a huge factor to so many people's depression, social anxiety. And I mean, it's insane how social media over the years has caused people to be less and less social.
Hmm. Well, back to your previous, like people not supporting, like misery loves company, right? It's just so true. And so I think uh it's important that I guess we just recognize this in individuals that usually, I mean, not everyone wants or needs to get sober, right? And so I feel like, uh, but at the same time, there's definitely that lack. And of course, not with everyone, but when somebody's feeling, in fact, I will go as far to say is the people that are most interested on some soul level in getting sober are probably the ones that are most likely to sabotage your sobriety. You know, it's probably unconscious, but
Mm.
they're just looking at it as a reflection of what they should be doing and, you know, essentially want to pull you back into the mix, into the numbness. And yeah, I think everyone needs to make their own decisions on how to create boundaries for themselves, but doing a digital detox is always a good idea. I try and do it at least once a year where, you know, I'll admit that over the years it's gotten shorter and shorter. It used to be like a month I would go off social media. Now I'm proud of myself. I can do it for 7 days because for me now it's not, um, it's perceived as not as optional. But so I find little ways to do it. And yeah, I think it's so important to pull back and gain perspective. Like sometimes you can't even figure out how you're feeling if all you're doing all day is reading everybody else's feelings and opinions of their own feelings.
Yeah, and the thing is, people, you are also, if you want to limit screen time, essentially, you're able to go in the Facebook app and see how much time you are spending on this app on a daily basis. I took a year off of Facebook because this was a lot when the politics was going on, and I mean, every single post, I have tons of family that are insanely right on the right side of politics, and I have a ton of friends that are on the total left side of politics. And so it was just constant, just trash talk of both sides all day long. And it was just like, this is not what I come to social media for. So I come to social media for conversating with friends, seeing photos of their vacations, or not so much photos of their babies, but at least photos of their pets and stuff like that. And I mean, it was just getting so depressing. And I was like, so I took a year off of Facebook. I recently got back on, but maybe a couple months ago. But I try to limit how much I spend on the app per day. So I mean, when I was on it before, I would say like 3 hours a day just scrolling. That is not healthy. I mean,
No.
not whatsoever. So now I try to limit it to like 30 minutes a day, which I think is enough to kind of just like a couple photos or something like that, or hit up a friend or two. Um, but it's so important to actually go out. There's so much of the real world to see. And I think when people ask me, they're like, "Oh, what type of movies do you like to watch? What type of TV?" And I'm like, "The TV I have is unplugged. I don't even use it. I have Disney Plus on my phone. I have not even opened the app in like 2 months because I so much more prefer to go out and indulge myself into art, music, friends, dinners, and things that make me happy. And in sobriety, you don't have to isolate yourself. I mean, during addiction, I isolated myself. I would sit in my bedroom and get high, or go to the bar, put my headphones in, and just drink until the end of the night, just by myself. And so now I see that my happiness comes from just being involved with other people, doing things that bring me joy. And thankfully, with the money that I save and not drinking, I'm able to actually go and do these things and afford it now, which has been great.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the pandemic was one way of looking at it is it was a gift in that it allowed us or forced us to see that all of these things that we perceive are making us feel more connected really aren't. They serve a purpose, but it's to not in lieu of spending real time with real people or going for a walk or just the simplest things that involve going outside, to your point. I think are just so essential. And I don't know, as a mom, it's like this ongoing battle. I know, I'm sure, like, our parents were so concerned about how much TV we were watching, and I'm so concerned about screen time. um but I see it in myself and my children and my husband, when we've let ourselves just scroll or watch whatever, you know, be it an adult or a child, you take that phone away. And certainly, like, when they're not prepared, like, you just like, no, time's up, like, or we gotta go. There's like agitation. And if nothing else, pointing to how unhealthy it is, like that we have this like negative reaction. Like, my children often have basically a temper tantrum. I've learned to just let it happen, and like they get over it and find Lego or something else to do, or they get their helmets on and we go for a bike ride or whatever. But I think we all have a lot more clarity now. I will say that because I didn't do any program or anything, I didn't really have any community around sobriety until the pandemic. And I was, spending a lot of time on Instagram, but made a lot of really great connections with different sobriety communities, and also awareness that, like, there's quite entrenched sobriety communities in some regard. But I just learned and met so many people, and I did feel a sense of community. Um, and also, I'm very much looking forward to physically going to networking events and conferences and retreats, and being face to face, looking people in the eye. And also, there's like an aspect of people's energy. I think you can get a little bit of it in digital, but it's not the same.
No, it's most definitely not. I mean, I went to meetings, of course, but a meeting and then the hour that you're there is very you're there for a reason. I mean, we discussed those reasons. But I went to my first sober event. I don't even know what month it was. I don't remember, but it was here in Dallas, and it was just insane. The energy level in the room, everybody being sober, having an amazing time, laughing, talking, and you just look around and you're just, oh my God, these people aren't drinking and they're having an incredible time. And of course, you not working a program, that was the next thing I was going to bring up. Of there's many avenues and ways to get sober. I myself worked a 12-step program, but that's not for everybody. So I mean, for those listening that 12 steps may not be their cup of tea, like how did you do it without any help?
Yeah, well, I think aspects that were important of how I did it were one, I looked at it as an experiment. I think it's a good way to get a lot of clarity on how you could feel. And I think for most people, or a lot of people, it seems impossible or really scary to just say, I'm never going to do anything ever again. So I think it's about working in chunks of time, and over time, it just reinforces your choices that you feel better. And for me, one massive thing was the amount of energy. Like I first, funneled that energy. I started training for half marathons, and eventually did a marathon, and saw myself really fitting into that culture. And also that's also a culture that like people have addiction to running those races. And um, there's a little bit of everything in running world as well. I think another key point is I had a girlfriend, well, one of my best friends. She and I used to drink way too much together, but she got sober. I think she's on 10 or 11 years now. So I'm on 4.5. And she was way ahead of me. And, she was kind of I wouldn't say she wasn't a sponsor in that sense, but she was the one person where every once in a while I would check in, and say, you know what, I'm noticing this. It's so weird. And she's like, yeah, you're at the year. Or you're like, yeah, you're at 3 years. It like just gave me sort of like a little bit of comfort that what I was experiencing, for example, several years into it, I feel like the first year you kind of avoid, I'll speak for myself, I avoided like the obvious places it would be, like I wasn't trying to go to a club and not drink. I was just choosing my social settings differently. And then it got to the point where that didn't, I mean, now I don't go to clubs for a different reason. Like again, I'm usually in bed by 10:30, because I get up at 5. But the at some point you get even more clear about the kind of people. I think that's one thing that getting rid of the alcohol gave me clarity on some of my longer standing relationships, and how I would always be the one that was reaching out, and how I was always, it's not necessarily a blame thing. It's just appreciating that you have the ability to decide who you're going to give your energy to.
Yeah,
And so
most definitely. That's super important.
when I was so in such a better place energetically myself, I was even more protective of my own energy, and making these decisions. And, so that would be something that I would run by my friend. She's like, oh yeah, just wait. I think one thing that I also is very helpful is to start taking care of yourself in other ways. So I kind of had that background of like all the reasons I was eating better, and I was, exercising. For me, meditation was key. For me, that's like one of the key factors. It's kind of this like release valve of stress. And I can, even if I miss a day, it's not like a catastrophe, but if I miss like a week, I immediately notice that I'm just not able to control overreacting about silly things, not as in control of my emotions or my thoughts. And yeah, I think so. Community, taking better care of yourself on all fronts, having some sort of spiritual practice, whether it's meditation or breath work. I was also reading like crazy. I'm a huge fan of Gabby Bernstein, Rebecca Campbell, lots of books on health too, but those were the two that kind of, I think, paint like a really modern, beautiful alternative to religion in terms of a spirituality that most people can get on board with. I'm also a huge Joe Dispenza fan. He talks all about how becoming supernatural and got into quantum physics. So I just felt like every time, and these things just kind of like come across your path when you're more open and ready to um, receive them or pick them up, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many books out there. I know it's called Quit Lit, is like the quit literature, and there is so many books. There's one I've recommended on here before. It's called At Least I'm Not the Frog, by Charlie Gray. Um, his book was about just his story of relapsing, and like he went through almost 36 different um detoxes and treatment centers before he finally got sober. And I think he just celebrated 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. But community, I want to bring that up, is I think so important. I mean, even if you're not going to meetings, if you're not doing this, like find just one other sober person that you can have a conversation with, because knowing that you're not in this struggle alone and you're actually able to have a conversation, whether it's face to face or over the phone, can make a huge difference in your own journey. Um, I think that's the most important takeaway that I've ever gotten from a 12-step fellowship is the fellowship portion of the friends and the camaraderie that you surround yourself with. Um, and just building those friendships up and knowing that you're not alone, that a phone call away, you could talk to somebody about a struggle that you think that nobody could understand. And then they're like, oh, really? They're like, oh, shit, that was 6 months ago for me. So it's super important to surround yourself with somebody sober when you're in early sobriety, and like you said, giving yourself challenges. You said this was a year challenge that turned into now 4.5 years. So I mean, if you don't look at it as a year. I mean, I hate the whole one day at a time. I absolutely hate that saying. But start with 7 days. Start with 3 days. And then after the seven, go back to being a drunken fool and then be like, okay, the next time around, let's try 30 days and then 90 days. Um, so I mean it could be small personal challenges to prove to yourself. And then after 30 days, 90 days, you feel like, holy shit, like I feel so much better, and you'll start seeing that change that you said you saw. You started feeling better, you started having more energy, and of course then you started looking at other things in your life to continue to benefit you, like your diet and exercise, the marathon. So it's there's so many avenues and so many different ways to get sober. um there's never a cookie cutter way in doing this. At the end of the day, if you get sober and you can maintain it and live a happy life, that's the end goal. um so before we cut the episode, is there anything that you haven't said that you would like to tell everybody?
Well, first, just that I definitely read a lot of sober literature. That really helped as well to feel that was probably my first community, actually, was listening to podcasts and reading literature by other people that had gotten sober. That was really powerful for me in the beginning. But I think I just wanted to leave off with um, inviting you to just reconsider your relationship with any toxin. You know, pick one, focus on one at a time, and it doesn't need to be this all or nothing, but you're not going to have that clarity until you try. And in order to have the clarity, you need to completely take it off the menu for a while, let your body reset itself. And, I think you might be surprised. I mean, I certainly, now I work with a lot of women that wouldn't even, like, they don't have a drinking problem. They're just way better off when they don't drink. And I think I'm optimistic because there are, more and more communities, more and more fun communities, sober bars, events. Like there's so much culture and life around this now that, I feel like if it had existed or I was more aware of it in my 20s, I probably would have made a lot of decisions differently because, yeah, it's just deciding that, well, that's the one other thing I wanted to say about identity. So often we just get so tied to an identity that we developed over time. Like I'm an ex raver. For a while, I was really identifying as a runner and kind of like dropped that. And when we shift out of wanting to identify with that anymore, there's this layer of self judgment that we're not good enough, or we're not going to be a part of the team, or we're not going to be accepted socially. And so back to, I guess, the community, like maybe find a community with people that already identify with how you want to identify, but still don't really identify with.
Yeah, it's the whole like surround yourself with people that you want to be like in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody has resonated with your story or wants to get in touch with you about being a wellness coach, like how would they get in touch with you?
Sure. Through my website, it's just meganswanwellness.com. And I work helping people get well. We essentially build out their own wellness lifestyle over a series of months that we work together. I also help entrepreneurs, mostly in the wellness industry, but who are interested in getting out of their toxic work 9 to 5 and starting their own gig. So if you're interested, you can connect with me there, or Instagram, LinkedIn. Everything's at Megan Swan Wellness.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
All
You
right,
too,
bye.
Holden.
Thank you again for listening to today's episode. Hit that follow button to be notified about new episodes every week. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at The Sober Unicorn Podcast or on our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. There you will find our episodes as well as our very own sober-owned shop featuring products from small businesses that are sober-owned. And remember everyone, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.